Hi everyone, my name is Kurtz, and this summer I was in Nepal for 5 weeks to study the urbanism of Buddhist sites. So just to kind of start as to why I wanted to go to Nepal and study Buddhist sites and the urbanism around them, I believe that the built environment is a physical manifestation of a culture of a given time and place. So I think to me it seems fitting that religion is a really huge aspect of culture that shapes our environment a lot more than I think we realize. Especially people who have been in Rome already, you study a lot of these urban spaces around churches, and you just kind of take for granted that that's what religious public spaces should be. And I think I kind of figured that in going to Nepal, I would discover that that's not the case, and I most certainly did. So just so you know, this is where Nepal is, because I think a lot of people don't quite know exactly where it is. So it's in between India and Tibet, which is currently occupied by China. So Nepal has unfortunately a history of really bad natural disasters. So this is the 2015 earthquake, which it is still recovering from. It also gets yearly monsoons. This year alone, it has killed 90 people. So while those storms, perhaps in other parts of the world, are not nearly as destructive, because it is one of the poorest countries in the world, it really suffers greatly from natural disasters. So there are essentially five different types of Buddhist sites that I discovered while I was exploring the mountain villages of Nepal in the Annapurna Circuit region and while I was in the Kathmandu Valley itself. So stupas. So this is kind of an example of a stupa in the village of Chame. So generally, what I notice with stupas is that they tend to be on the outside of a lot of the villages and even some of the major cities like Kathmandu. I think largely this is kind of there's almost a symbolic value of having to really seek out the stupa. It's symbolic of the path to enlightenment, I would say. And so you can see that this one here in Chame is on the very edge of the village. This one is in Upper Pizang, which is this very mountainous village. And from where I was staying in a tea house, it probably took me about 30 minutes to get up here. So this one on the left is Swayambunat, which is in Kathmandu. You have to climb 365 stairs to get to it, but once you get there, it's pretty cool. And then on the right is the Peace Stupa, which is in Pokhara, which we had to canoe across a lake and then hike for an hour to get to, so you can see the theme there. This, on the other hand, is Bodhanat. You can see just the sheer number of people here. And this is, I think, my favorite place in Kathmandu and in Nepal in general. This is what the stupa looks like. This is an exception. It's in the heart of a very urban area, and this well, it's called Bodha is the area. Bodhanat is the stupa. The area itself is very interesting because, as you can see in this picture, this is a bit of the more of the touristy time of the day, but in general, about half of the population of Bodha is monks. So you can see a lot of the monks there, which is very cool. There's many monasteries all within a very like small area, and I think one of the things that you'll see recurring in the other different types of Buddhist sites is that unlike in Christianity, where it's about congregating and about bringing a group of people together, and so you can see that reflected in our public spaces like piazzas. With Buddhism, that's not the point whatsoever. It's more about circumambulating a space. You can see everybody is walking clockwise. You always walk clockwise around a stupa or any other Buddhist site. And you can see that a lot of the people, I have one, this is a mala, so they're similar to rosary beads, but you'll see that many people have them in their left hand, and they'll walk around clockwise, which I'll explain a little bit more with prayer wheels. And it's much more of a personal journey towards enlightenment. Not that it's about the person itself, because it is about realizing that there is no self, but it's kind of more up to the individual to however many times they want to walk around a stupa or other Buddhist site a day. It's much more of a personal practice. The second type is monasteries, also called gombas. And so these were also you had to journey up to get to them. Oftentimes they were at the top of a mountain. Sometimes they would have a village associated with them, but the whole point is that the monks and the nuns, they kind of want to be a little bit further away from society so that they can meditate and, attain enlightenment in this lifetime. This is one of the smallest ones, which was very hard to find. Just kind of saw it on a map somewhere, decided to seek it out, and it's one tiny little room, and I think there were only 3 nuns who lived there at the time. This is Upper Pizang, which I showed earlier. You'll see the kind of big central room where the prayers and ceremonies take place in the mornings and in the afternoons. Next are prayer wheels. So this is the most at-home daily way that you can practice Buddhism. So like I was saying before about you have the mala in your left hand. When you walk around, since you're walking around it clockwise, you spin the prayer wheels with your right hand. So it's all about going in a clockwise manner. These are just different examples. And this is what they look like up close. They typically have mantras on them. Typically Om Mani Padre Om, which I will show what that means in a minute. But yeah, so that's throughout. And then Mani stone walls. So these also will have mantras on them. And they are, the process of carving them and of having them presented in your village is kind of a way to make offerings to the spirit of a place. So if you didn't know, Buddha was born in Nepal, not in India, even though, of course, his practice became popular in India first. So what the Dalai Lama says, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you can look at it if you want. But it's all about practice, about wisdom, about attainment of enlightenment, and about purifying, your mind, your body, your speech, and every part of your life. Finally is rock shrines for the dead. These were absolutely everywhere, and it's a little bit difficult to find a pattern for these. Sometimes you would see them most notably on the tops of mountains, and all I could think about is how on earth did somebody get up there, because they would be truly, completely far away from anything that resembled a path. But therefore, like you can kind of see, that's one up there. There was a gazillion of those. They're really very interesting. And then this is just kind of some of my favorite pictures of Nepal. So you can see this is Boda, the picture on the left, just how chaotic it is and yet how harmonious it is at the same time. And you can see some of the flower offerings. And at the bottom, those are monks ages 3 to 8, which is pretty cool. You see a lot of those. And yeah, that's the end. If you want to see more, that is my website on my blog. I've included a lot of my research. This is kind of like a really tiny little taste. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any questions?
Hey, great presentation.
Thank you.
How did you get, what inspired you to get involved with this subject matter?
Sure. Well, okay, so part of that is Krupali, who's right there.
Okay.
And part of that is also Douglas Duwani, who is probably not here. So they both have been to Nepal and influenced me quite a bit. I also personally have always felt kind of a pull towards Buddhism, and so like my grandmother was Buddhist, and I kind of wanted to explore it a little more. And it kind of started me thinking about just how, like I was saying at the beginning, like culture is what impacts our built environment, and that, we studied a little bit in Stamper's class, like sophomore year, about stupas. And I remember we were all kind of like, do you go inside the stupa? Like, how does it work? What is this? And so I just kind of, all that together, I decided, why not just go and explore? So.
Okay. All right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't bring it.
Hi, Cal.
So my question for you is, you kind of touched on this when you were talking about the Buddhist stupa, if I'm correct. But how much has like tourism influenced this? Because you said a lot of the times it's about the journey there and it being a difficult path. But I know like a lot of times with things that become tourist attractions, they'll be like, oh, here, take this bus and we'll get you there fast.
Well, so kind of fortunately and unfortunately, because Nepal is such a poor country, um, there isn't as much of kind of like that materialistic tourist impact, but you do see it a little bit, especially with like the trekking routes and stuff like that. I think Bodhanath is not nearly as influenced just because most people when they go to Nepal, they don't, because that's like most of Kathmandu is like in a totally different area, and then it's like Bodhanath is you have to seek that place out and know that you want to go to the Buddhist center of Nepal to go there, if that makes sense. So a little bit, you'll definitely see tourists, but I don't think it really disrupts the harmony of the area like it does in other places in the world. So
Thank you.
Which type of Buddhism are they practicing?
they're Tibetan Buddhist. So at least where I went specifically, because it is so close to Tibet and there are many Tibetan refugees, there are people in the mountain regions to the north where I went who are primarily Tibetan Buddhist. In Bodhanath, it's primarily Tibetan Buddhist. But it does change depending on where you go. So.
Okay, thank you, Cal.
Thank you.